land, as well as instructor add-ons and initial. The instructor initial part is important because there are so few of us in New England now, and so I'm prioritizing those. The people who are on my wait list who come to me for CFI initial go to the head of the line. That said, I'm currently booked into mid-June with just CFIs.
Thank you, Randall. Pass the microphone now. I'll start with you, Rob.
Hi, my name is Rob Dumovic. I'm a DPE with the Boston FSDO, currently managed out of Richmond, Virginia, and been a DPE for 21 years, but I've been giving check rides in the 141 world since 2011. So it was a fun and semi-easy transition to start doing the work for the FAA as a designee. And the major difference from the 141 world to the FAA side was that in the 141 world, those checks were still considered a lesson. So it wasn't so much that you could teach during it, but the outcome wasn't necessarily with the same jeopardy. It was just marked as a lesson was incomplete when we had examining authority at the university level. If you were giving a 141 check ride, still as an examiner now, those check rides are obviously still a jeopardy ride, whether you're coming from Bridgewater or Horizon Aviation, I think is one of the only other 141 programs in the area. So that side of things, it's a little bit different from when you have your own examining authority. So this has been a lot of fun to be on this side and to get to meet a whole new group of people, as well as see the training aspects of the Part 61 world and how those are different and still the same and the same standard that we were held to during the evaluation. So, and I also have Mark Nathanson to thank for that, because I came to New England from Ohio in 2013 because he quit being the aerobatics instructor, and I really wanted to be the aerobatics instructor for her Executive Flyers Aviation. So thank you, Mark.
You're very welcome. And again, Dominic, thank you very much for this very nice award and recognition. And please thank Southern New Hampshire University for this. I'm Mark Nathanson. I'm twice retired, once from the Air Force. I flew in the Air Force and also flew for FedEx all around the world, and was an examiner in Asia for 2 years and 22 years here. So it's time to hand over the baton to the younger guys who are a lot smarter than me and up to speed on things. So I was an examiner. I teach at East Coast Aero Club, and I'm in charge of all the instructors there. So they give me a cut of their pay. Oh no, I'm supposed to say it. All right. Okay.
I thought we were all getting awards here after you gave one to Mark over there, but okay. Yeah, you actually have to earn these things, huh? My name is John Goebel. My background is been a military pilot for the Army for many years, and I'm a specialty aircraft examiner now. Specialty aircraft, all the things that'll kill you much quicker than other things. Well, actually, it always depends on the pilot, but they include things like trikes, powered parachutes, gyrocopters, balloons, I think, are also specialty aircraft here. And the people that fly these things have generally adrenaline junkies, or ones that can't get a real license. So they get these sport pilot licenses. And to be an examiner for these people, you always take a deep breath before you do that. Their training is relatively minimal compared to the training you all get in. And we all get in flying commercial or private level. And usually it's not the flying aspect that's spotty, but it's the knowledge, the aeronautical knowledge part of it. That's the only thing with flying within these things as an examiner is that, you always, each one of us in a check ride of any kind, I've had, I don't know, dozens of them over the years with the military and elsewhere. You always get a little more nervous than usual. You say, geez, I've done this 100 times. Why am I nervous? So when they get nervous in a specialty aircraft, and the trees are really close by and stuff. And it's not a good combination. Um, we also worked with the some of the Navy guys, the special ops guys, and they're incredibly smart and they're incredibly brave, and they lack experience in flying. So a combination of bravery and no experience is really a bad combination. And I found that out personally. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. So we're going to start tonight off with a few predetermined questions. We're going to go around the panel, and if you would like to answer the question, I'll pass the microphone to you. Randall, of course, being online, if you'd like to unmute when you hear a question you want to respond to, please do. Once we get through the first initial 6 questions or so, I'll open up the floor to those in person or online who would like to ask questions next. Okay. So the first question tonight is regarding issues with applicant preparation. And we said, i.e., what are some things that can be done to make the pilot qualification, aircraft qualification process pre-check ride go a little bit more smoothly?
Now, these guys definitely have seen a lot more candidates than I have at this point, but whenever you have candidates showing up, it's not necessarily, especially on the private pilot side, their fault if they're not prepared for at least documentation or experience or endorsements. The CFI really sets them up for success in the pre-qualification stage. On my website with the check ride information, I try to also help them with a checklist and a bit of an application that just comes to me with their details so I can look at their 8710s beforehand and try to point out any glaring errors or anything like that. So a couple that I've seen, especially with student pilots, their dual plus their solo should equal their total time. If we're seeing a difference in those numbers, there's probably some kind of math error there in the logbook. And I would rather get that sorted out before they show up for the check ride. That way they're not on the day sitting there staring at me, going through their logbook going, oh, gee, I can't find how this lines up. Just have that stuff squared away ahead of time, and they'll be in much less stress under a normally already stressful environment. And then CFI endorsements, is that one you want to talk about, or should I? Okay. Yeah, so CFI endorsements, there's a couple interesting ones. Make sure you're verifying 6165 on the advisory circular that you match verbiage and that what you're writing as far as the parenthetical letter applies to that candidate. I had a couple of candidates show up for a private pilot airplane single engine land check ride, and they had gyrocopter endorsements. It's like, hey, we got to get these fixed. And now they're seeing it for they're hearing, oh, my endorsements are wrong. I hope my CFI is still here. And we don't want them to have, again, that panic, that stress, those heart palpitations right before they go and fly. Really kind of uses up the brain fuel. And now they're distracted and not on their game.
One more thing from the CFI perspective. After an exam, a practical exam, I always take notes and give feedback to the CFI. Inevitably, there's stuff that the students or the applicant will say after the evaluation that, oh, my instructor never told me that, or it's told me differently. So I always try to provide feedback to the CFI himself or herself so they can learn and maybe include that in their.
How many CFIs do we have here? Okay, I'm sorry. Not an easy thing. I think all of us up here have realized that Dominic was at another university, and I'm sure here, seeing how difficult it is being a CFI. There's got to be a dedication, absolutely. I'm in charge of the CFIs at East Coast Aero Club, and that's what I tried to make very clear, that the example they set is going to be so important, because the law of primacy, and what they see, that's what they're going to do. And I've seen that happen too. Some of the things that I find remiss on applicants when I was testing, nobody seems to know that there is a lot of good information for both VFR and IFR in the AIM. I strongly suggest instructors who are instructing to have your students read that. Read the Airman Certification Standards. And Rob pointed out on the way up, I thought only the CFI changed, but apparently all of them have changed. And Rob and I are on the way up here. We're going through some of the changes. So they should read the ACS and know what the requirements are. Not only the requirements, but also the risks, so they can talk to those. Progress checks are valuable. At East Coast Aero Club, we're not 141, we're part 61, but I instituted a progress check program because I think it's valuable. It puts the student in the testing environment, and they get the cranky old guy looking them, with the the single eye there. Why are you doing this? And it puts them in the testing environment. So when they finally get to the final practical test, they've already been used to being tested.
Great. And Randall, I want to make sure I remember you up there. Did you want to comment on this as well?
Sure. Like Rob said, a thorough intake form beforehand is a pretty good way to catch a lot of this stuff. My intake form is a bit.ly link, and it's checkride intake, bit.ly/checkride intake. And I'm usually able to look over people's endorsements and maintenance logs beforehand. Sometimes I can't get to them until the day of the ride. But that's helped us in the past catch a lot of things, including logbook issues, hours not flown, incorrect endorsements. I came very close to losing 2 applicants, but I didn't, and so far have a 100% batting record. I've lost nobody on check ride day to being unqualified, which I'm pretty happy about.
Thank you. So it's funny. The second question was actually about endorsements. So we actually got pretty well through the paperwork, but I guess I should ask on the topic of intake forms, 8710s, endorsements. Are there any other issues that anyone on the panel seeing for particular check rides? Yeah.
Requirement to endorse the knowledge section. Look in the federal regulations under Part 61. Each test, just about every test, I believe, has a knowledge requirement. You got to put that in the logbook that you've done these individual things, and there's different ways of doing it that I would accept. It would be initially the date that you finished teaching that, and at the bottom sign it off that you endorsed that you've trained the individual in all these different things. So, and that's been an issue on some of the tests. We don't see anything, and we can't start a test unless we see the ground training.
Yeah, and also with that, some online ground schools that satisfy all those requirements and the requirements to take the knowledge test, they have you print out a completion certificate, which you then take to your testing center as your endorsement. The testing centers are keeping those, and then you get to the check ride a couple months later, and there's maybe you've lost your login, or now you just don't have access to that in an email or whatever. And so now we're having to kind of jump through some hoops to prove that you've gone through those topic areas and satisfied that requirement. So a qualification for a candidate, just print out 2 of those things. Keep one in a check ride folder or fold it up in your logbook. It's just going to be easily accessible so that we can prove that you have that. It's on the rare side, I would say, but it's something that's kind of cropping up, and let's nip that one in the bud.
And the new ACS has outlined in bold and underlined that examiners need to see the certification of the simulator that's used to satisfy those hours. So that's something we need to be paying better attention to.
In addition to these comments, one of the things I do is the day before the exam, I send to the CFI a very specific list. This is exactly what I'm going to be looking for in the logbook, so they can make sure that those things exist. If not, they can very quickly make it exist, I think. So that's probably a good idea to have your examiner do that.
Thank you. So in regards to Actually, how many CFIs do we have in the room again? A lot. Okay, great. The next question has to deal with CFI and student communication to the examiner regarding the check ride. Any, I wouldn't say tricks, but any tips on how a CFI or applicant should approach and converse with you, as well as have you noticed any sort of communication issues as an applicant approaches you to conduct a check ride or from the instructor? Okay.
There's a handful of ways to do it. When I was full-time instructing, I did not let my students reach out to the examiner. I always reached out when they were ready to go and arranged everything, made sure all the information was there, and then I was preparing them with what the examiner provided for resources, what was going to be on the check ride, weight and balance, cross-country planning. Nowadays, it seems to be that it's always the student that's reaching out, and the hazard there, it's rare, but students get a little bit ambitious and they're reaching out and they're nowhere near ready to go. And so you start to get the details from them. And if something doesn't kind of smell right, I'll then reach out to the school and say, hey, I've been contacted by this person. They're looking to set up a check ride. Are they ready to go? And occasionally there's a no, no, they're not. So please don't book them. We'll talk with them. We'll be in touch. So just make sure that you're very clear with your students. Yes, I want you to reach out to the examiner. Here's a list. It's available on FAA.gov. You can find a DPE on there, and you can start that process. But just be involved in that. ATP school does a little bit differently. They have check ride coordinators. I don't think that's the exact term, but that person is now reaching out to the DP and saying, hey, I've got 2-3 candidates. Can you give me a couple days? And Bridgewater, Margie will also do that as well. And she'll reach out and say, hey, I need a couple days, a couple students, and we'll organize that. But once you start that communication with the examiner, make sure that you understand fees, where they want you to go, weight and balance scenario, all that kind of planning stuff. Your CFIs, you've been through this a couple of times. You've taken a couple check rides. You know what's to be expected. So help guide them through that. And as students or candidates or learner pilots out there, ask questions. Ask your CFI, and then once you start to schedule these things, feel free to reach out to that examiner and make sure that you understand everything you need to bring for that.
I don't know of anything that says that you cannot, as an instructor, look at the briefing that is sent by the examiner. I don't think there is anything that says you cannot look at that, help the students with the cross country, and ask those questions to make sure they really know the answers. I had a student come out who's going to Lake Placid from Hanscom Field, lots of mountains. He was going to go, I think, 4,500 feet when the mountains are above that. A little low. And so I questioned that several times, and check ride unfortunately did not go very well. Just a suggestion.
The only thing I could add to Rob's comments and Mark's comments is that I do send out a form letter to an applicant that's about to take the test. And here's my expectations. The other thing which you already covered, but the other thing I always put in is, here's the most common reasons for failure based on the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years I've been doing this. And it basically what it does is, here's why the people that have failed did to fail. So don't do that. That sort of thing.
I prefer text message, and I prefer to hear directly from the applicant. I'm happy for a school coordinator or a chief instructor or their individual CFI to reach out. All that's fine with me. And the intake form asks for the 8710 and the instructor information and all that stuff. And so I did have somebody reach out to me. I said, great, I've got an opening next week. And they backpedaled because they were expecting that I would be ready in 2 months. So they were trying to get a jump on it. So we sort that stuff out, like Rob mentioned.
Thank you. I'm not sure which Band-Aid to rip off first. So that we could do either mosaic or we can do trends noticed on practical tests, which I think we should start there. Okay. So next question was submitted, and it was any noticeable trends you're seeing outside the realm of applicant preparedness and those things we've discussed previously, things that you're seeing on the check rides that maybe either make you scratch your head or you're going, that's not a trend in the right direction. I'm going to word it this way because it was sent to me in a funny wording, but any particular check ride you conduct, any particular trend you're seeing is fair game. And we can go from sport through CFII. Choice is yours.
So I only do private pilots right now, and for them, the check ride is generally their first experience in that realm. And it's sometimes difficult for them to put themselves in the mindset of, okay, I'm actually going to fly this planning that I've done 5 hours ago and go to this destination and make all these decisions and really be that PIC. And it's in the briefing several times during the check ride. You're the PIC for today. I make them sign 6147 Bravo on my sheet. Like, you're the PIC. It's not me, not ATC, not someone in some other airplane. You're the final authority as to the conduct, safety, and operation of that aircraft. So them getting into that mindset is really important for them to be able to make the decisions in the aircraft. And every once in a while, we're up there and they'll ask a question like, do you want me to do X, Y, and Z? And more often than not, the answer is, do you want to do X, Y, or Z? It's not up to me to tell you what to do in this specific scenario. So feel free to ask that question, but don't be surprised if the answer is, what do you want to do? And, you know, I picture the meme of, what is it, the Notebook, you know, what do you want? You know, not trying to be that guy up there, but you have to make the decision. You have to be that PIC. And if it's something that's legit and, you know, you need some extra help with, like, I'm going to give that to you. And we have some weird situations, but I also tell them, I'm not intentionally going to put you in harm's way or vector you towards an airspace, but I'm human. I make mistakes. And if I do, I expect you to say, no, that's not a good idea. Let's go this way instead. Be that PIC. So the trend is, hey, it's their first time being that PIC besides their solo flights, their solo cross countries and things. And those are typically, oh, I'm just going to do the same thing I just did dual. So be that PIC, make those decisions. And then it's a whole lot easier for me to evaluate where you are as the ACS standard dictates.
Rob is exactly right. I've had people ask me, for example, I asked them to demonstrate power off stall in a turn, 20 degrees of bank. And they say, well, how would you like me to do it? And I go, that doesn't make any sense. They've got to be prepared to do that. Some of the trends I just called out, I send these out periodically, what I call my trends letter, brake checks, speed of heat, power on, they hit the brakes. I go launching through the windscreen, not appreciated. It's in the book. Power to idle, go 1 or 2 knots, power to idle, then check each brake, and don't launch the examiner through the, although he's got very good insurance though. There you go. Approach, if you look at the, this is a little bit difficult to explain, but if you look at the RNAV 23 into Bedford, it goes from, it's one of those T's, it's only got half of the T, but how many instrument instructors do we have here? Okay. When you build an approach that starts at one point, goes to the next point, and then turns approximately 90 degrees to the other point, I've had this happen on a check ride where they go to the first point and halfway to the next point that has the procedure turn in the form of a racetrack pattern, ATC is told the applicant to hold there. And they say, I haven't got a clue. Because in most of the GPS, it will not build it. Some GPS you can ask or you can tell it to hold there. So I talked to an ATC specialist and they said there are a couple ways of doing it. And I'm sure that some of the people really understand how to other ways. But one is request radar vectors and put it back on ATC. I did that once, or the applicant did it once, and they said, why? And I turned to them and I said, this is not your fault. Tell them you need radar vectors. And then the controller gave me radar vectors. The other one is, so long as you're established on the course from first point, second point, direct to, and then build it. You've got to stay on there. You go into Anchorage, Alaska, Subic, Ketchikan, Alaska, Aviano, Italy. Those are the places where I know they really have high mountains. If you go anywhere left or right, you're going to hit the mountains, such as in Ketchikan. The place used to say, if you are 1 dot to the right, you will hit the mountain. which invalidates your insurance. Okay, moving on. Flat landings, no air braking. Make sure they land on the main gear because these gentlemen will not pass, or I say your applicants won't pass. If it's a bad landing, and we've had a couple failures where people just did not, or applicants did not go around, you can always go around. They give you at least one because you're nervous or your students are nervous. Yeah, exactly. So that's not a bad thing to do. Normally it's on the short field landing. Is that what you find? Yeah, because I do that one first. Aircraft systems, we have to ask, or they have to ask 3 questions, that and 3 questions on physiology as a minimum. Take them to an airplane to the hangar, show them the primer line, the magneto, the P lead, so on and so forth. VOR into Gardner, if you look into that, I'm sorry, Gardner. People have trouble maintaining the center line. If you're centered up, if the CDI is centered up right before you get to the VOR, it's going to start going left and right. Teach your students to hold that last heading if it worked. Once they come out the other side of the cone of confusion, then the needle will eventually catch up. So I found that an issue, and I found people who don't pass, the ones who they immediately start chasing where they think the needle is going to be, and then they go right through it. Already went through that. CFIs, maintaining situation awareness, knowing to stop talking when the radios are somebody's calling them on the radio, but also when they are not teaching during a task. They've got to teach through the entire task. How many teach CFIs? Okay. Very important. They've got to teach and they have to say the correct words. So as you train them, hold them to the standards, hold them to saying the correct words and the correct terminology. For example, I hear your controls, my controls. The FAA says you have the flight controls, I have the flight controls. What I never wanted to hear testing CFIs was, oh, you're looking good. That doesn't mean a thing to me. You're on airspeed. You're a little high. What are you going to do about it? Let's pull the power lower the nose. Clearing during maneuvers. I'm an old fighter pilot, and it drives me nuts to see people staring at the instruments, not looking outside. And I've had several people throughout the years fail because they never cleared. I came this close to a Jolly Green doing 400 knots. I don't want anybody to have that happen to them. We've got to clear the airspace. You've got to make sure. At East Coast, I mandated that the students have to learn to say clear left and clear right in the hopes that they will actually clear. Roll out on downwind, look into the upwing. If it's a high wing, when you roll out, look into the low wing. Spins. I ask the CFI applicants, what is the airspeed during the spin? And I hear, oh, it's very fast. And I said, no, we're talking about the airspeed, not the vertical speed. Well, they're both fast. So now this is like the guru of spins. I've taught a lot of spins. So if you want a really good education on that, and also Dominic asked me to give a presentation on spin sometime, which is on YouTube. I'm not an actor, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Select. Taxiway hole line. I ask everybody this, or I was asking everybody this. Nobody knows what a taxiway hole line is. Look at Hyannis, there's one there, and if you look at Hanscom, there's a couple there. And I'm told, well, at Hanscom, that's the run-up area. But the dash line is the hold short for a taxiway. If somebody is told to hold short, that's the line. Unusual attitude recovery with the autopilot for the instrument. How many teach instruments? Okay. If you have an autopilot on there, teach them how to use it to recover, and also that it will get them into trouble and what's the quickest way to disconnect it. How to determine the distance from a runway, reference point for turns around a point. Teach the same way you teach how to determine downwind. In the high wings, halfway up the strut, the runway's halfway up the strut, turns around a point, beginning eights on pylons, things like that, halfway up the strut, or about a quarter of the way into the wing. Seems to work. I have also some secrets on S-turns that takes a little while to go through. When to descend to the traffic pattern. I see people descending 8-10 miles out down to pattern altitude. That makes me really nervous. because if the engine quits, you've taken away a lot of possibilities. Over priming the engine for start, they're looking at the fuel flow and they stare at it and they over prime and they have a big bang or a big pop. Weather, not knowing the weather, see, taxiing against the brakes. When I observe my instructors teach in the Cessnas, I look at the tail. If the airplane turns and that rudder doesn't move, I know they're not using the rudder. Simulated engine failure. Bob was talking about that. Not flying to a position that's familiar, such as a downwind base. Pull the power, and sometimes I put them on a downwind or a base, right where they want to be, and they just have to lose that altitude. And then they go over here, and then they go over there, and they check out Kmart. And they don't make the field, and that's not good. Not memorizing the procedure if the engine failure occurs at low altitude. Multi-engine, understanding the systems of the multi-engine, and the hub of the propeller is nitrogen. If that leaks out or the air charge, what happens and what do you do? I find people don't know that. Stabilized approach criteria. How many of you are planning on going to the airlines or the military? Okay, good for you. How many military want to be in the military? Okay. I keep telling these young people who are going through pilot training, I said, you give me your wings, I'll go through and I'll guarantee you do a good job. But nobody's taken me up on it yet. But nonetheless, stabilized approach criteria is huge. And if you go, when you go to the airlines, you have to know that verbatim because that's a requirement.
Tough act to follow here. We got a whole manual's worth of stuff over there. That's great. The only trend, back to the original question, that is really not related to the topics that you gentlemen were discussing. You see a lot of gray hairs. Not too many young people, and probably Lindsay could address that. Not too many young people are getting into aviation as such. There's more or less gray hair here than I've seen usually. So I guess the trend is to people that, especially in the sport pilot area, people that have always wanted to fly. I hear this quite often. All my life I wanted to do it, never had the time, had kids, job, and all that. But now I can in their 50s and 60s, so they get into trying to get a light sport and get a sport pilot license, which is an easier route and less expensive way to do it. So it's my only comment regarding the one comment that you made about the instructor saying that was a good thing to do. Equally, I see what an instructor or a coach in sport will say, well, that was a dumb thing to do, or oh, that was stupid. And that's been said to me many times. So I always have to say, what specifically was stupid? I do so many stupid things. So make sure that you're very specific about when you're saying that you did that wrong. What specifically did I do wrong? And it always annoyed me when people don't do that.
That's a good point. I had an air combat company where we offered air combat and formation, out of control recoveries and a couple T-34s. And I had a former Navy Top Gun working for me, and he said that in the debriefs, we'd never say dumb or stupid or those other things that we can't say in public. But he would say, here's the good things you did, and here are the other things that need work.
Don't just tell them what they did wrong. Tell them how to fix it.
I like that a lot. Mark, I find it interesting that of the things you mentioned, a couple of them are high up on my list. One of the things that that I find with systems is that we are constantly coached by Oklahoma City and by our managers to ask scenario-based questions as opposed to rote questions, right? We want to get somebody at the correlation level of understanding. And so my systems questions are often scenario based. And sure enough, that leaking nitrogen hub shows up. A bunch of other things do too. I had a CFI applicant come to me one time, and when I said, well, what about this stuck valve scenario? What happens if you stick a valve in an engine? And he looked me in the eye and he said, intake or exhaust? And I knew that he was about to pass that question because he knew exactly what was going on and what the different effects would be depending on which cylinder failed. But another candidate who memorized by rote how an engine worked or just memorized the numbers on the engine wouldn't necessarily know that. I've got a little laundry list here. I'll be quick. At all levels, I find that slips are generally weak. In multi-engine airplanes, I am shocked at the number of people who take their hands off of the throttle quadrant when we are doing single engine work, especially a VMC demonstration, where the very first thing you do to recover is to chop that power. In an emergency, how to deal with a situation where you need to get on the ground now versus a situation where you want to stay in the air as long as possible. Those are very different emergencies. And like Mark mentioned about how to find a safe spot, a lot of applicants are coming to me at all levels without ever having to seriously given thought to where they're going to put an airplane down if the power plant fails. And once you've done it, you think about it very, very differently, and you look at those patches of grass very differently. Mark mentioned he sets them up on downwind when that happens. Well, what do you mean? Well, the field's right there off your left wing. Why not treat it like a traffic pattern like every other 1,000 landings you've done? But I find that somehow isn't translating. I had a Cirrus pilot come to me and say, gosh, I really hope that you're not going to give me this missed approach hold that goes directly into the approach hold of the next hold, because I don't know how to program that in my system. And I sort of batted my eyelashes at him and I said, well, how do you fly a hold? We get really dependent on automation, and in planes with great automation, where the training is primarily on automation, learning how to fly stick and rudder and fly raw data green needles can be a new skill for some people. And funny enough, that training center doesn't send me applicants anymore, nor does the other one. So I really find that you need to have the basics solid despite how beautiful the airplane is, because as we're seeing in the accident trends, when things go sideways, the cost of the airplane really has no bearing on your survival for that. On instructor rides, I was always very surprised when people had beautiful lesson plans printed out, and I would say, great, tell me about task M. And they would say, okay. And they would open up their lesson plans. On my plan of action, I'm looking at the practical test standards, or in this case now the ACS. And so I would encourage instructors as they are preparing for their practical tests to be referring to the actual test material, which is different from what they're going to teach in the classroom. You won't necessarily teach it exactly like you're going to test it. And so the way that you respond to an examiner asking a question on a test is going to be slightly different from the way that you're going to respond to a student who's just learning that skill for the first time. In the case of the practical test standards, the requirements are very clear and exactly what must be taught is very clear. The ACS is not clear in the same ways. And so ACS exams will be different. And I'll start giving those as people start requesting them, or May 31st, whichever comes sooner. I find CFI applicants coming to me without an active risk management strategy. And to put it in perspective, a friend of mine died on a solo flight the day that I got my CFI. And I walked out of that ride, and when I found out that she had killed herself on that solo, I was devastated. And I realized that as an instructor, I had the awesome power to decide when a student was ready to take that step to be in an airplane by themselves, and that what happened to her could have been prevented in part, possibly, by the instructor's risk management. And so the risk management section of the PTS/ACS is not a formality, it's not an acronym, it's the life of that student in your hands when you put them in an airplane. And that is everything. And if you come to me asking on behalf of the FAA administrator for me to give you instructor privileges, I hope that you have a solid understanding of that awesome responsibility.
Very well said, everyone. I haven't opened the floor up yet for open discussion and open audience Q&A, but one question came in that was interesting to me on the side. It was for you, John. And I guess I should ask the room first. How many fly Rotax? Okay. So the question was, have you been seeing any issues with Rotax engine management on check rides?
No, I generally find everybody who's flying Rotax has a clear understanding of the engine. That's probably due to the providers who have been sending me Rotax are excellent instructors.
See, basically there's two types, the 912s and the 582s on the Rotex. And 582s are nothing to them, they're very simple. The 912s are a little more procedural as far as starting it in a certain sequence and making sure that the oil pressure and such are adequate. But the answer is essentially no, that there's no issues with Rotex. Anybody have issues with that? Other than they stopped making the 582s, I believe. Only 912s now, which is good because they scare you with two people on board in a light sport aircraft.
The only appropriate amount of horsepower is more.
I like where this panel is going tonight. We talked about SPIDs quite a bit. I'm going to go next to the upcoming ACS changes for the CFI practical test. The ACS is released online, as many of you might know. It's open for review. It will be implemented, according to my notes, on May 31st. The question to the panel was, do you foresee any noticeable changes happening during the CFI practical test as a result of the ACS changes, such as the reimplementation of minimum controllable airspeed and the knowledge item on factors associated with spin instruction?
We're going to defer to Randall.
We can go with you,
That's
Randall.
right, because Mark having left the examiner's seat now leaves the rest of us to make 25 different plans of action now, because don't miss the fact that not only does the CFI have an ACS, but just about every other test has an updated ACS. So there's a new private, a new instrument, a new commercial, new add-ons, et cetera, et cetera. Instrument instructor didn't get touched and sport didn't get touched. So those are the two that stay, but otherwise I'm 8 or 9. I did 2 this morning. I was up early this morning and I'm getting them done pretty quickly. So I'm eight new plans of action in. Back to your specific question. I like the new ACS for instructors. The PTS in many ways allowed an instructor to prepare by rote because it told the instructor exactly what they needed to teach and how they needed to teach it in a way. And the ACS doesn't do that. The guidance, as you know, that we're given on the ACS is to select at least one knowledge, at least one risk, and all of the skills from each area that we choose to ask about or choose on the test. That means that 126-page document covers a lot of ground. And in my case, I've chosen a bunch of individual items from the different areas of operation in addition to the entire tasks that are required to be covered. And so I've selected the tasks, but then there's also those other areas. I thought the spin question on airspeed is brilliant because it really requires an understanding of the difference between a spin and a spiral. Dominic, don't miss, you said May 31st, don't miss the document 8900.619. Lindsay shared that with us, and it clarifies how we're going to adapt to this document. What it says, 8900.619. I think I had the 619 right. I know the 8900's right. But that document says that if the instructor and the applicant agree, they may use either PTS or ACS, or old ACS versus new ACS. You can use either of those until May 31st. After May 31st, if you start a new test, you must do it with the new ACS. It has a provision in there for those who have started tests on the old documents. if there is a discontinuance or a disapproval, that letter needs to include the ACS or PTS testing document number and effective date, so that when they are retested within 60 days following May 31st, or 59 days of the exam that they, 60 days of the exam that they took, or 59 days of May 31st, here's an FAA mouthful for you, you are required to continue testing them with the same document that they began the test with. So I love the ACS. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about my test because I feel like it came alive in ways that it didn't using the PTS. I feel like we're going to get a better caliber of instructors out of that. Dominic, you had specific questions about a specific item in the spins. What was that you were looking for?
Yes, thank you. And that was upon audience submission, but it was mentioned that there is a knowledge item on human factors associated with spin instruction. I guess that is a particular info.
Yeah. I do remember that now. And let me say that I don't want to discuss it publicly, and that's going to come up in testing. I think what they did with the human factors piece about that, and what the FAA did, this giant working group over the last, gosh, how many years they've been working on it. What they did by adding the new different tasks and the new human factors stuff was made a much better test. So I think that makes it a better test. I hope that's enough of an answer. Anybody else have other questions about the CFI ACS, since there's just two of us in New England doing it now? Oh, let me say one other thing. I tell every applicant, I write it big on my intake form, please reach out. I'm happy to take phone calls. If I can't talk, I won't. You are welcome to reach out anytime to discuss testing, to discuss your test, to discuss how to prepare your applicant. It's less about a gouge for me as an examiner, because I'm given the test straight out of the ACS. Hi, Lindsay. I'm given the test straight out of the ACS, but it's more about exactly what Mark said, areas that we see that are deficient, or things that it's important that people pay attention to.
Thank you. The last question before we open up the floor is the modernization of special airworthiness certification, i.e. Mosaic, is supposed to be coming out next year in its entirety. And we expect that might change the sport pilot tests, what applicants can bring for the sport pilot tests, but it may affect other check rides as well. And I think when they're asking us, they're thinking more of the sport pilot instructor certification. Does anyone in the panel want to weigh in on if they think Mosaic will have some sort of measurable, or shall I say exciting, changes to check rides after it comes out?
So proposed change will all of a sudden include into the light sport category the 150s, I think, 172s as well, Cherokees. So that adds a whole level of complexity to light sport, meaning the training that's required is going to be the same as for private pilots. Although the sport pilot level will have a lower requirement for testing as well as for training. But yes, the answer is definitely yes. If that happens, all the plan of actions will have to be modified severely to include the additional tasks that the ACS or the PTS will require, which is not the case now with Sport Pilot for the other aircraft that's now included under the light sport aircraft category. Yeah, so yeah, the answer is that.
I suspect that's why we didn't see a sport pilot ACS this year.
That makes sense. So those were our pre-canned questions. So now I'm going to open up the floor for discussion. I don't think I need to say this, but when you're asking a question to our panel members, please be civil. first of all, we had a request in the room to start over on, shouldn't call it the CHI table, but we're going to head over to the CHI table first. If you have a question after the panel answers, please raise your hand. I'll bring the mic around to you first. And if you're online, please raise your hand so I can unmute you.
Thank you, panel, for coming in tonight. We appreciate it. So my name is Zach. I'm an instructor in Portsmouth. And my question is, I guess it kind of goes over two parts, but first I kind of want to set it up with a story. So I recently sent a student, an applicant for a check ride. And I've sent a couple to Randall before, so I appreciate his work. And I like to go in and sit in for the debrief with the student afterwards to kind of hear, you had mentioned before, going over kind of important items that the instructor can improve on. And so in this recent applicant, the discussion went well, both areas in the oral and in the flight portion. The examiner said things were really well, but there was one area, and it was a special emphasis area on checklist usage, and especially in the checklist usage for cruise and the descent check. And the applicant did not pass because they did not physically pull out the checklist in flight. They ran the items, but they didn't pull the checklist out. And so, special emphasis item, I understand as an instructor, we need to focus on everything in that category. But my question kind of to the panel is, the special emphasis area, how important is it to you when it comes to testing, and what items are you looking for? And kind of the second part to it is, the student asked the examiner after, what should I do to retest? And the examiner said, well, just go up with the instructor, pull the checklist out, put it away, and come back. What items do you see as an examiner as something worth retesting versus maybe being a discussion point in the debrief? Where do you see kind of that split, and where do you see where a retest needs to be done?
That's really an excellent question, because we run into that probably all the time. You say, this was a little marginal, this particular thing. If I failed this exam at this point, I have to go back down, and it's something simple where you know that the instructor covered this particular skill, a particular question, but now he or she has to get instruction on that particular maneuver or question that he failed on. So it's always, there's no right answer to that. I think it's just a matter of trying to, sometimes it's, as an examiner, you're not supposed to repeat things unless the question or the particular request that you made was not clear. So I'll rephrase the question, or I'll rephrase the particular request for the maneuver in such a way that you can find out if they actually knew what they're talking about.
Come on, you're no longer on the hook. You can answer these better than I know. That's a very interesting scenario that you had pop up, and I had something almost as vague where on the cross country portion the candidate busted the Bravo. So what's the retest on this? Don't bust the Bravo next time. It's like, so the retraining, they have to go up with the CFI, get the 6149 endorsement. And so some things like that, work with the examiner on to say, hey, help me out here. What can I do to retrain this? And if it's a skill item in the ACS, it's got to be done. It's got to be demonstrated. So that's where we have to hold that standard.
I'm with Rob on that. I hear the subtitle in the question is, hey, everything else went fine. This is just a debrief item, right? Then the applicant won't forget it. It's not our test. It's the FAA's test. And the skill item absolutely states in just about every single maneuver uses checklist, plus a special emphasis item. Busting the Bravo, turning onto the wrong taxiway, turning the wrong way in a hold, like Mark said, that will kill you. Not using a checklist in this airplane that you've flown for so long because you're so comfortable not using a checklist doesn't seem like a big deal right now. But the day it becomes a big deal, it's going to get you hurt. It's going to bend metal. It's not my test. I can't be subjective about stuff that is specifically said in the test. You have to do this. I just can't. Even if it's a debrief item. I'm so sorry. You turned the wrong way in that hold. Everything else went great. but you just flew into granite and you are dead. So I'm sorry.
One thing, I think we go through a lot of check rides. I have no idea how many check rides I've taken. But I learned from every examiner, everybody in the military and FedEx who gave me a test, and being taught by the FAA how to test individuals. But so you pick up ways of answering or asking the questions, just like John was saying, certain ways. If they don't understand, you ask it again in a different way. But I remember in my MD-11 type ride, I was doing a pretty good job and I knew it. And the examiner says, well, what about this? And I gave him an answer. And as soon as I gave the answer, it's like on the Wheel of Fortune, when you give the wrong letter, oh, somebody's already got that letter. I knew that I had given him the wrong answer, and I'm ready to say, oh, wait. And he says, if you were to answer that again, and then I answered it correctly. And he says, I knew that you knew this. So that's one of the methods that I used. Also, I would, when I ask a question, one of the tells, you might say, of an examiner is they stop and they try to think, well, let's see, what are they really saying? Which also allows the applicant time to think about it and say, oh, wait, this is really what I meant to say. And then I say, are you sure? Is it this or is it that? And if they say, no, I'm positive it's this, we move on.
Example of this kind of stuff is this happened just real recently. The applicant was from downwind turning to base, making a left turn to base, making a left base. Never looked on final to see if any other. Now this, of course, will kill you. So it's very important that he fails that. Well, what's the corrective action by the CFI? We landed, said, go to your instructor. He said, don't do that, dumbass. Always look. And of course, you always look. But under the stress of the situation, he was just so focused on making that turn and lining up for the final that he just totally didn't look. But that's the kind of thing where, it's very important that you do that. But at the same time, what's the corrective action? Well, don't do that.
Thing,
Yeah, and sorry, Mark, go ahead.
yeah. Go ahead, Randall. I'll talk after you.
Back to that thing, John, the stuff that will kill you. I just had a brilliant conversation with a well-known seaplane examiner or seaplane instructor who's just fantastic. And one of the things he reminded me of is these habits that are ingrained, if you're not ingraining the habit, there's a bigger issue at stake. If you're not in the habit of using a checklist, there's a much bigger problem building, which is a massive hole in your Swiss cheese. And so the fact that you didn't pull out a paper checklist is a problem for different reasons other than you just didn't do the skill that's listed on the test or so to put that another way, the discipline that it takes to pull out a checklist every time is the kind of discipline that we need to train. And to Mark's point, absolutely find another way to ask the question. Sure. And it may not be in that moment. It may be a different moment altogether. It may be pausing and asking it in a different scenario base. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt all day that if you told me something that was dead wrong, that you may just have not understood how I asked. And so I'll ask you again. But those formative steps and those pieces, like, why did we have to go back when I did left traffic instead of right traffic at this airport? It's because that will get you hurt. And so that fundamental skill building is really
One thing, Lindsay, you're also with the FAA a mishap investigator, are you not? You have a checklist, you're on a go team. I was Chief of Flight Safety for Air Defense Tactical Air Command. I worked directly with TAC, my own command. And I was the guy who went out and investigated the accident. So I saw the broken bodies, and I saw the busted metal. And a couple times I worked with the survivor, with those who were deceased, their families. It's right here. It just kills you. And I look back and I think, as a Chief of Flight Safety for command, what did I miss? You as instructors, and this is the whole point, is to keep them safe. Keep your students safe. Be dedicated to do that. If you think, well, this is just an avenue to the airlines, you shouldn't be teaching. You'll get there. And don't solo people and go right into cross country, go out and do the air work, um, so that they're paying for your requirements to get on the airlines. Don't do that to them. Use the syllabus. But if you have a student who has a crash, you've got to sit down and think about what did I miss? So that's what they're talking about, being professional.
With the way that we are setting up scenarios for the ground portion, especially on the check rides, it's more like a choose your own adventure book, and your answers that you give can also then be used down the road in the same scenario. Well, you told me 5 minutes ago that this was true, so now that answer is now true, whether it is or not, and it's now having an effect because you believed it on this next thing. And it's now we can start to set up in our scenario the dominoes that are falling, and you have to now make decisions based on what's being presented to you there too, and demonstrate that knowledge and those risks. And you may then have that opportunity to go, oh wait, nope, that wasn't right then, so I'll fix it with this, and now we go do this, and now instead of going into the dark cave, now we're climbing around the outside of the mountain, and we're making better decisions and fixing things. So that, like, it's not just you gave me a wrong answer, we're done here. We'll continue to investigate. I just asked who to raise a hand. We'll just keep the mic. I don't know. Who's got it? Isn't it?
Again, sorry, we usually have 2 mics in this room, but that's the way we're rolling tonight. I need it. Make sure to state your name first and your question.
Hello. My name is Tyler. I was waiting for the hi Tyler, but that's not. Yeah.
Hi, Tyler. Thanks
Yeah.
for coming.
So I've gotten my private pilot's license, commercial license. I've traveled to obtain multiple between these licenses to different schools, and I've experienced a lot of different stuff. And one of the common things that my CFI, CFII, whatever it is that they tell me is no person is perfect, except if you earn an SNHU Excellence Award. But the and yeah. One of the questions that comes to mind, because as my former CFI instructor actually over here had stated, there can be so many things that go right in a check ride, and there can be so many things that go wrong in a check ride. And there are special emphasis areas that are, according to the ACS, and it's sometimes depending on what you're doing, the PTS. But when it comes to that judgment call for you gentlemen who are not in that special emphasis areas, what goes for, oh, he's not perfect, but it's okay, or this just isn't going to happen? Because there are guidelines with the FAA about it, and as such, it's almost impossible to follow it perfectly to a T. So I guess my question is, what's the decision-making process that goes through your mind of, is this passable? Is this redeemable? Is this debriefable? Or is this going to have to wait for another day?
I started a while ago a DPE forum, and I get all the DPEs that were interested in joining this. We ask these questions, how do you do this? How do I do that? And we all learn from it. If we can't answer the question, then the representative, which is me, sometimes it's Rob, will go to the FAA and say, we're confused on what are we really supposed to do here. So on our end, we're trying to make it, and this is not a requirement for us to hold this forum, but we do that to give you a better test so that we can say, answer your questions is sometimes the question is, how do we do this? Well, if it's gray or murky in the ACS, we can come up with an answer.
And while we're doing that too, my pre-test briefing, I'm very specific. I say the standards of performance are listed on page A-9 of the ACS or the outcomes. And so what we're looking for with these standards, with your familiarity, you have plus or minuses on things like airspeed, heading, bank angle, attitude. And that means that perfection is not the standard. You have a bullseye with which to keep the aircraft inside of, and occasional deviations outside while fighting to stay inside are acceptable. And if you are able to do that, you are maintaining the standard and you're able to demonstrate proficiency, safety, and good judgment. So it's not a plus or minus zero game. There are some minus zeros, say on short field landing and normal landings, things like that. Slow flight has a minus zero on the airspeed there. So I'm not sitting there during your steep turn going 99, 100, one, I got you. No, I'm not doing that. I'm seeing, okay, 99, he's starting to correct, 100, okay, 101, 100, it's back inside. Okay, I see the fight, and I want to see you fighting. What I don't want to see is you sitting there fixated on the instruments, and suddenly you glance at the altimeter, and it's 105 feet high, and you go, and you give up, and you quit. You just made my job easy, but hard, because I don't want to deliver bad news, but that's what you earn. So it's not perfection. There's no such thing as a perfect flight. It doesn't exist. It's how we deal with the problems and issues that arise. And we continue to be that PSE and fly that airplane.
The one
Boy,
thing,
I really,
the one
go
thing that
ahead. Go ahead.
Randall, everybody, I think with the four of us here, or the three of us that are examiners, if do we all agree that if an applicant goes out and we have to decide how far out and how long they go out, if they say correcting and they're actually in the process of making corrections, that to me is reasonable, as long as they don't go out too far, too long. Randall, what do you think about that?
It's just what Rob said, man, and I love what you said. If you exceed the standard, but I see you fighting to stay inside it, that is very different from glancing up and noticing that you're out of it and your shoulders slump and you're like, oh, okay, well, I guess I failed, and you give up. And if we can think, to your point about the question, that doesn't just apply to the maneuvers, that applies to everything. So if I see you fighting to stay inside your understanding of this airplane system, it feels very different from, oh gosh, I'm just overwhelmed, I'm going to let that go because I obviously don't know it. Yes, there are areas where we have discretion. Yes, perfection is not the standard. Yes, AFS 850 tells us we get to exercise that discretion. This was Zach's question before too, about which is a debrief item and which isn't. If I think that the thing that's happening is a significant hole that's going to line up in your Swiss cheese of events that might cause structural failure, I can't pass you. I have had, and I'm sure we've all had, parents that come to check rides because they want to be the first people to fly with those students. We had a student fatality on their way home from a check ride in New England. They passed the ride and died on the way home. That is the standard, the filter that I'm applying to the FAA standards for these tests.
Anybody else in the audience like to ask a question? Left side of the room. Yeah. I wasn't just picking on Tyler. Please state your name and your question.
Well, actually, my name's Liesel, and I'm here kind of on behalf of Javier down in Beverly. Who come. I guess my question is, are there like some baby DPEs on the way, or because
We got Sean.
okay, talk about like not people not becoming pilots. We don't have a lot of DPEs, and Tyler, you want to become a DPE? You can make those hard decisions.
That was a great question. And walk the microphone back fast.
Sean, got Sean.
Yeah, Sean Berdour is just coming online. He was at, I think last month he was at Oak City. So he should be getting wrapped up here. He's done. Oh, well, glad he texted me. Anyway, so yeah, at Hanscom, he works for Mike Goulian Aviation over there. And he's a gentleman who has been a pillar of aviation education in New England for a long time. And he's just an outstanding human being, flight instructor, pilot. And I can't wait to see him have success as a DPE. A statistic that we were told, I think last year, was 10 years ago there were 1,700 DPEs, and now there are less than 700. So there's quite a big drop off. I am a little bit different in appearance than the right side of the dais here, and that's because I made a choice to be a professional flight instructor. I've been a CFI since 2007, and being in the 141 world and being in the CFI for that long. Great, my hearing is gone too. No, I'm an oddity to be a DPE, selected as a DPE at 37 years of age, which was pretty cool. Where you normally see people that have a career at the airlines, they're teaching on the side if their airline allows them to, and then once they retire at 60 or 65, that is the age now, they still have years left, but maybe 10 or 15 of those that they want to give back and be DPEs. And so you have that retiring cycle, and then it got pushed out when they changed the retiring age. So then maybe the DPE hiring slowed down, then COVID happened, and all kinds of factors led to DPEs retiring but not being replaced. FSDO members retiring and people not wanting to do that job. And so if you have a passion for instructing, I want to encourage you to continue to give back to the aviation community, because even once you go to the airline, you're still a wealth of knowledge and experience, and you're having more experiences that you can give back to future students. And if a student that you take from nothing to private gets 90% of what you taught them, and it takes them another 3 years to get back to maybe 95% of what you were, well, they only then teach back 90% of their 95%. And if you watch those generational losses, we can track it back to World War II, and we had a plethora of very experienced aviators coming back and teaching. It's no surprise that we can look at trends of accidents and lowering of requirements, like spin training went away for private pilots. And so now we're just teaching to pass a test instead of teaching to be the best skilled aviator that we can be. And especially as CFIs, you are the safety valve to give them experiences that you definitely don't want them to have for the first time with their loved ones or other non-pilots on board. As the candidates get to the end of their training, take them up in those gusty conditions, take them up, go find crosswinds, challenge them, challenge their skills, and so that you can find their weaknesses and turn them into strengths. And then those last 3 hours of instruction that you need to sign somebody off, stop helping. Help less and less on those last couple flights, so you can really find where their thought process is, where their PIC ability is. Stop being that PIC. Let them take that, and then you can build them up. You can find that weakness, build them up, and make them a better pilot going into the check ride.
Liesel, to answer your question, it might be you. I never thought that my number was going to come up. I put my application in and never thought my number was going to come up. And guess what? My number came up. And a bunch of CFIs are looking at me and they're like, why don't we have more DPs? I said, guess what? Your number's up. Apply. If you live in Massachusetts, please apply, and please do it now. Please apply. Please be looking at it. We need you.
Just an FYI, as I understand this process, which I've been trying to retire for a while, I can't. You put in an application, which is a fairly elaborate and lengthy form. It goes into a dead mailbox until there's a need for a DPE in a particular region. So if there's an opening in that region, then they'll open that box and say who applied that would be suitable for that region. So it's not just a matter of, hey, I want to be a DPE. It's a matter of their need first, I believe.
I have had the honor and pleasure of mentoring a lot of people for a long, long time in the military and as an examiner, as a flight instructor. Dominic has my number. I'll be glad to give you my number and my my contact information because we want you to know these things. And the FAA would always tell me, Mark, you may test this person. So you got to be very careful about what you tell them and who you teach. And I'd say, okay, yep, gotcha. And I do it anyway because we want you to know the information. We want you to know the information so you can pass it on to your students. We have Rob. He's had an emergency, which was amazing, and he saved everybody. John here was military. I was military and airline. So there's a lot of experience sitting at this table with that's available to you. I would suggest use it. Yes, I will bore the living daylights out of you because I like to talk about the things that happened to me, and some of them are actually true. But the important thing is to go to the old heads, the people who've had the experience, to find out what's out there. Now, the FAA has recognized the fact that as instructors, you cannot subject your students to every situation. It's just impossible. For one thing, because of your experience, as opposed to somebody who's been there, done that, like these guys, Randall Webb, and all the other examiners who have experiences. Take advantage of it.
And my final thought on this too, the DPE, initial DPE seminar that you can go out to Oklahoma City and take, you do not have to have a hiring by a FSDO to take that. Anybody can take that course.
You do. That changed.
Now?
Yeah, that I was the
Oh.
last class.
That changed then. Never mind.
Yeah, you've got to be appointed in order to get into it. But DPE Resources has the slideshow of, I want to say, a 3-year-old DPE class. It's incredibly useful information. So if you Google around about DPE certification class, you can actually find that slideshow online of what they present at the initial class. Exceptionally useful information. And one other thing that CFIs might want to think about, especially with the new ACS coming out, make a plan of action, just like a DPE would. Pretend that you're a DPE, go through the ACS and say, well, how would I make this plan of action? What would I test? So that you'll be a better instructor for your students as you prepare them for a ride.
Thanks. Thanks for that question, Liesel. Just from Portland FSDO, I know we get applicants that aren't necessarily qualified, so we can't do anything with that unless we're seeking a deviation. So one thing you can do is look at the FAA Order 8000.95, and that will tell you what the qualifications are. So when you do submit your lengthy application, as Rob said, which is true, that you are, you're ready to go and you do meet those minimums for the hours and for the requirements for flight instruction time. And we are seeking right now, it's not just based on the amount of applicants that we have, but it's also based on what we can manage as a FSDO. And I know Rob mentioned it earlier, ASIs are dropping off and not necessarily being replaced. And that's part of the problem too, is that we don't have the means necessarily to support more DPEs and we don't have the DPEs that can be supporting the aviation community. So it's a double-edged sword, and we're trying to correct that and working with, at least in the Portland FSDO, we're working with the DPEs that we have currently to get them working on more authorizations so that we can better support the more advanced ratings. And that kind of takes up a lot of our time versus adding new authorization or new DPEs right now. But you can always put in the application. You can let us know that you put in the application. That's very helpful so that we can go in and review it, because it does kind of go to a dead spot, as John said.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, does anyone online have a question as well? Can I bounce back and forth? Usually takes a minute. No, nothing new in the chat. Why continue around the room? Oh, John. Sure.
This probably goes to everybody that's instructed or received check rides, which we all have many times. Not as many as you, Mark, but close. It's very important to know how somebody will react under stress, not just the stress of the check ride, but the check of the stress of a situation. And so now I'm always faced with the dilemma. Here's a very stressful situation, and the person on the other end of the of this experience is under a lot of stress. Do I want to complicate or increase that stress by creating a scenario or creating a situation where I say, okay, all of a sudden, cut the engine, where do you go? And there's no place to go. So is that something that you think should be part of your training, is to say, think clearly in a stressful situation, and how do you do that? And or should we at all create scenarios where there's stress during a check ride?
The Sully, the Miracle on the Hudson. Yep, hard to replicate. But the airplane flying handbook talks about landing in trees, for example. What are you going to do?
That's a not great scenario, but if you're flying a Cirrus, caps deploy.
Which
As
is
in the-
on the new ACS.
Oh, good. As as you're giving the examination, especially in the aircraft, we're watching the candidates. We're not just watching outside looking for traffic or watching the instruments. We're also watching them. We're watching the beads of sweat form and fall down their face. And I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but there are occasions where during the examination process, you have to present the next scenario or thing for them to face. And you hope that they will rise to the challenge. And there's just sometimes when you're pretty sure that they need a second. Okay, like, hey, give me a 180 to the right. Just give me this clearing turn right now. Just give them that second. All right, just let them breathe. And then there's other times where you just know if I give them that 180, it's probably going to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, are they performing at that point as a private pilot anyway? We see all kinds of things and stress reactions from the students that you learned about as your FOI. And the biggest, I think, stressor that we see is especially after an unsat, where, okay, I'm going to tell you as soon as it's safe to do so that what just happened was outside the standard. And usually it's not me telling you, it's me going, hey, what's the standard on that for altitude? It's this. Okay, where were you at? Oh, I was outside. Okay, let's go back. And very rarely, but it does happen, you'll get somebody who will argue it. Now there's a teaching moment back on the ground. It's like, hey, someday you're going to have a job interview, and I guarantee a question that you're going to get asked is, have you ever had an unsatisfactory check ride? And now you get to answer yes. And there's going to be a follow-on question. Tell me about that. Very vague, very open-ended. Well, this examiner was a jerk and the airplane was garbage and the weather was crap and I didn't like this thing and the ATC was yapping at me and yada, yada, yada. It's everybody's fault but mine. Thank you very much. We're not interested in your services. Well, I did this on this flight and I was outside the standard, and the next time I came back around, I never made that mistake again, and I learned a lot from it, and I believe my skills will be worthwhile your company and will improve the safety culture here. Excellent. When can you start? Okay, so we'll have that negative event occasionally, but how we react to it says a lot. And part of the training from Oak City was, if you have someone who's getting particularly violent, you run. Haven't had that one yet, but Mark?
I have a very close friend who's assistant chief pilot at Delta. what Rob said is exactly true. They know that somebody applying to the airline has failed, and that's exactly what Rob said is what they're looking for, a positive attitude.
I, as an instructor, pulled the power on a student one time who looked around and said, "But we're nowhere near an airport." Um, on a check ride, I do not raise my voice. I will give you failures. Oh, look, it appears that the engine is simulated on fire right now. The engine is simulated on fire. There's a simulation of smoke coming into the cockpit. I'll give you that, but my personal style is not to yell at you and create that stress. You do have maneuvers to do. You do need to do them in a certain order. You do need to do some things in a certain amount of time when that happens. But I don't yell to make that happen. I do hope that instructors are giving some kind of level of stress to students who are ready for it so that they can handle those kinds of emergencies with a sense of the immediacy and the importance, because it's really hard to convey in the testing environment just how important that simulated emergency is if there's not actually a fire. I did have an instructor, I took my multi-engine commercial check ride, I was yelled at the entire time. And man, I was angry. He had me so rattled. Military guy, right? Surprise, surprise. But we got on the ground. He looked at me and said, "Hey, man, you fly pretty good." I was so mad at him, but you know, he was just my ninja karate master instructor, right? Tester in that moment. So hopefully, as instructors, you can give that level of stress so that they do understand that what they're doing is well and truly taking their lives and lives of their passengers into their own hands.
I guess during an exam, back in my younger days when I didn't know any better, I would create a stress situation. Just ask them a question while they're setting up on short final or something, and that never worked out well. So during an exam uh, itself, I don't create any more stress than what's already there. However, again, back to military training, all of your training involves creating stress situations and have you react calmly, basically. So as a CFI, I would strongly encourage you to do exactly what Randall just referred to, is create stress situations in a safe environment. You know, you got altitude. And just so, you know, even distract them. What's the square root of 71 just as they're trying to do a slow flight? Uh, something that something's going to happen if you fly long enough. Something bad things will happen, no doubt about that. And as such, you need to be able to deal with that somehow.
Yeah, we don't rise to the occasion. We fall to our lowest level of preparation.
I have a text message question, but before I get to that one, does anyone in the room have a question? Yeah. You don't have to stand up, by the way, but you can. You can stand.
All right, so my question is more related to CFIs. And now we see today everybody's just rushing to get their hours, go to the airlines. And my question to you guys is, have you seen a trend of decay or lower quality of instruction being given to all types of students over the years, just because the instructors are not committed to instruct the students anymore? They're just sitting there, they're just looking at the hops take over. They don't care what the students are doing. They just want to get out of there and move on with their careers.
Yes. Many years ago, the number 2 guy at the FISDO at Hanscom asked me in a group, one of the DPE meetings, he said, "Do you think it's the CFIs?" And I had to answer, honestly, yes. They're trying to get the hours, just as I explained before. You can't build your time based, having your student pay for it, doing the wrong things. The dedication, yeah, when I was a director of operations of a jet unit in California, these young 20-year-old jet pilots would go off in their own direction. I had to pull them in the office and say, "Look, you're just not going to do this. So you're grounded, and you're going to pull mopo for a week." And I had the Uniform Code of Military Justice that I could use to really make them understand the errors of their way. With the CFIs, it depends on who's managing the flight school, who's managing the CFI. If I had my way, which I don't, I would say all brand new CFIs would go under the tutelage of people, examiners, people who have shown the competence for a period of time, 3 months or whatever, where they would be asked questions, be taught, and experiences, and providing oversight to make sure that that instructor really was doing what they're supposed to do and learning about things. Only dedicated people should become CFIs.
My goal for myself as an instructor was my goal was being the best professional resource for that student who came to me. And I made them that promise. I said, I'm going to do my very best to be your very best professional resource that I can be. And I still have students reaching out to me from years ago. You need to care about what you do, regardless of what you do. And if what you do is the business of putting people in airplanes and sending them off to fly by themselves and get tested for advanced ratings, and you're the one who has the ability to sign them off and put them in that position, I need you to care deeply about that person's life and about what they're about to do.
The text message question was, when is the best time to get upset prevention and recovery training? Is it before initial certification? After initial certification? I think they knew who our panel members were.
When I was teaching full time, I was actually part of a company in 2009 that was upset prevention recovery training providers. And I was starting to dabble little pieces of it in even to student pilot pre-solo, because as you lead up to that solo, there's a number of things that can cause an aircraft upset during that first solo, not the least of which is wake turbulence. And so there's mainly a prevention aspect to that side of the training, teach you about where those dark alleys are so that you can avoid them. Exercise, what is it? Exercise superior judgment so you don't have to exercise superior skills. And then if all else fails, if you do find yourself in that dark alley, know the fastest way out of it. And that can only be a trained response recovery. So typically nowadays, what we're seeing in the industry is people are getting through private pilot. And after a check ride, I'm generally recommending, hey, go out, get tail wheel, get upset recovery, maybe do some basic acro, see if you like those things. Tail wheel is a great magnifying glass for your technique. It's going to start teaching you something I call the language of the airplane. Ever seen adverse yaw, a Cessna or a Piper? You'll definitely see it in a Citabria or a Cub or a Super Decathlon. It's going to magnify it. It's going to show it to you. It's going to kind of be that loud talker in the room that gets a little bit too close and you kind of want to get away from, whereas the Cessnas and the Pipers by design are very friendly aircraft. They minimize a lot of these things, differential ailerons, freeze ailerons. You don't have to use your feet. Don't have to. But there is a big difference between a pilot that knows how to use their feet and one that doesn't. And I remember my first turn from upwind to crosswind in the Citabria, I put the stick to the left and the nose went to the right. I was already a commercial single engine land. And I went, oh, that's what my feet are for. Oh, and like it just clicked because the airplane was now talking to me and I was now seeing what it was saying. I was like, oh. So there's so much more to this. So I would say tail wheel, upset recovery are two very, very important things. Get them early on because you never know when those threats are going to show up.
At East Coast Aero Club, I built a scenario for training spins in the Redbird because we lost our decathlon. The owner who was leasing it back left and they sold it. Wish they'd never done that because that was a wonderful thing. So I mandated that all pre-solo students and anybody else who wants to takes the spin training course. The one thing also that I provide, and I wish he was working for us because we'd be able to do a lot. He's a pretty good formation pilot. We don't tell him, but he's really pretty good. I put I do a lot of progress checks, and I put the people behind another airplane, 50 to 100 feet behind the other aircraft, let them fly in wake turbulence to see what it's really like. And the light bulb, you can see the light bulb coming on. Anybody wants to see it, come to East Coast Aero Club. And you get to do some formation. It's pretty cool. Scares the living daylights out of me, but people pay me.
It's, Dominic, I think it's time for us to quit here pretty soon, right? Oh, really? Oh, geez. Thought it was 2 hours. Yeah. Well, oh. I just have one last words of wisdom that I'm cutting off here. You probably heard this. Experience is something you get right after you needed it.
I think that's an Old Spice commercial.
Do the last couple rounds of questions. I know folks have some. Yeah. This won't become a selling game of UPRT, by the way, but everyone should take it.
Hi, thanks for this. My name is Brian. I teach every now and then over in the Nashua area. Hearing a lot of really good stuff about technique and how we can prepare students for, for their first time getting their license. But I'm thinking more about like risk awareness and avoidance. That I don't know. It seems a little trickier to get your arms around, right? How do you train a pilot to be better at decision making, risk awareness, and avoidance? We have tools that the FAA gives us, but I wanted to find out, like, do you see gaps in the when you're giving a practical about how people are doing with that? So yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think the question that you're asking is, how do you assess risk and potentially even expand your envelope? Not saying that you take more risks, but that you actually understand with the tools that the FAA especially has given us, when you write down personal minimums, let's say, you have a max crosswind of 8 knots. Well, how do you expand that to 9 comfortably? Or 10 or 11 or 12, or to what the manufacturer says, hey, this is our max demonstrated. This is what we showed in testing that the airplane can handle. That doesn't mean that that's all the airplane can handle, but how do we open that up? Number one, fly with a CFI. Fly with a more experienced aviator who's been in that. On the testing side, generally we're not seeing people who are taking risks. They're generally waiting for a day when there's calm winds and unlimited visibility and no clouds to go and do their tests. Fun fact, calm wind day, nobody can land the airplane. We're so used to landing with wind that when it's calm, it's like, why is it floating? Like, well, this is what it actually wants to do. So in order to evaluate those risks, a lot of it we build into the scenarios and the scenario-based training. And now I'm going to give this to Mark because he's seen a lot more of this than necessarily I have, and especially your background with the Air Force and the safety aspects there.
I'll make something up. When you talk about risks, it's right in the ACS, and that's what they're looking for. As I said, you have people, Randall, Rob, John, and myself, and all the other examiners who I'm sure they would love to give you scenarios, because we have to build the plans of action, which is our way we test. It's our guide for testing with scenarios. So as instructors, think about all the scenarios that you can build based on what you're training, that part of the syllabus, and then look at the risks involved with that, and then introduce the students to those risks.
They actually have a scenario list that they've published online for examiners to consider when giving check rides, and it's mission and complication and mechanical failure, and you can literally go through and choose your own adventure how you want to build those scenarios. Pilot Workshops actually does an impeccable job of scenario-based video training. I see a lot of soft personal minimums on check rides. People will say what their minimums are. They might even have them written down, and I hope that they all do. but they very rarely reflect reality. I had a young man, maybe he was 17 and a half. I mean, he was um, really just barely old enough to pass the ride, tell me that he had a 16 knot direct crosswind minimum in the 172. I looked at him a little bit. I'm like, where did that come from? He said, well, my instructor and I flew it one day. And I said, well, how'd those landings go? He said, I did the landings all myself and it went just fine. And we did a couple more reps in the pattern just so I could do it again. And I felt pretty comfortable. I said, well, tell me about your technique. What did you use? And he walked me through how he did it and the difference between, um, the difference between techniques in landing into a crosswind. And the day that we went out for the check ride, and I always have my feet right on the rudders, ready for some mishap or a student that misses something. And we had a 12 knot direct crosswind on the only runway at that airport. And this 17 and a half year old was about to take me out for his first takeoff into that direct crosswind. And I could believe him because when I asked him the question on the exam and he backed it up with some thorough knowledge, I bought it. And we were coming out. I was caging the rudders just a little bit, and he could feel it. And he looks over at me as we're holding short, and he said, "Would you take your feet off the rudders, please?" And I backed them off about an inch. I did not remove my feet from the rudders, but sure enough, all of his takeoffs and landings that day into that direct crosswind were beautiful, and they were right on standard. He flew beautifully. Your personal minimum should reflect what you have been flying. They should reflect an expansive sense of what it is, because as Rob said earlier, if you tell me that you are crosswind limited to 6 knots, fine. But if we go out for that check ride and there's an 8 knot crosswind and you say you're going to go anyway, now we have a problem. Especially when we get to IFR. Yeah, I'll do plate minimums. Well, have you ever flown an approach to plate minimums? Well, yeah, under the hood. Have you flown in actual down to minute? Well, I've never been in actual. Well, tell me about your minimums, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. Question was how we're doing.
I can't really speak to the statistics.
What was the question?
Oh, sorry. The question was, how are we doing on the risk management side of things with regard to the accident statistics that we saw earlier in the presentation? I don't really have the ability to speak to that. And I don't have any kind of data on demographic, how old, how young, how much experience. Doesn't, the age doesn't necessarily play a factor, but what have you been flying in? And you could be a 60-year-old pilot who's been flying for 30 plus years, and it's only ever been a blue sky day around the patch. That's all you ever done is takeoff and landings. And I think there was an RV accident out in California where that's all the guy ever did. And one day he lost the engine in the pattern and didn't make it back to the airport. So he was well within what his risk side of things was, within a half mile of the airport. And it still didn't matter because his level of preparation was not up to the needs demands of that emergency. And so FAA safety program is fantastic at giving us scenarios. Randall, you mentioned, what was it? The other program that puts forth.
Oh, pilotworkshops.com. They have a real world VFR and a real world IFR, which are exceptionally well done.
Yep, those are excellent IMC clubs, EAA chapter meetings, things like that, where they present scenarios that they don't give you an outcome. It's a discussion. It's an opportunity to talk about, hey, what would you do in this scenario? And then it kind of plays out. The group discusses these things. And so the fact that these things exist and that pilots are participating in them, I want to encourage you all to participate in, because it's a nice way to think about different things and how you would react that don't involve spending $200 an hour to burn some avgas. And you also get to meet awesome other folks who have been flying too and make connections. And as small as this community is, it's real easy to meet somebody who I don't know, maybe wants to hire you as an instructor and potentially buy an airplane and maybe have you managing it and paying for ratings and things that, oh, just because they liked you. And so now you're their corporate pilot, you know, so there's lots of opportunities there as well. And I want to encourage you to participate in those programs. And tonight's wing credit as well. And the fact that you're here means you're a part of the solution. And you probably know a couple other pilots. Encourage them to attend events like this as well.
You know, prior to this, I look in the light sport world. Uh, you know, it's been said that the most dangerous part of flying is driving to the airport, and that's true in commercial airliners. It's not true in general aviation, though. It's from my readings, it's like 10 to 15 times more dangerous to fly general aviation aircraft than it is driving, and it's 19 times more dangerous than flying specialty aircraft. Uh, However, it's still safer than driving a motorcycle, which is like 25 times. It's hard to compare it though, because you're looking at miles driven, hours spent, events, number of events participated in. But nevertheless, it's dangerous. However, I think the FAA has done a good job in. Not, I can't remember 20 years ago, there wasn't this effort to really stress safety with events like this or the other things that the FAA has done to reduce that. And I can't speak with any authority to whether that's been measurable success or not, but possibly Lindsay could or somebody else could.
John and Martha King would ask in their presentation sometimes to an audience to raise their hands if someone personally knew someone who had died in an aviation accident. I won't necessarily ask everybody to do that now, but I think that's probably a big number for those of us in the room.
Mark, you had mentioned that the trends, decreasing trend on instructor experience teaching the new generation. You know, with the advent of electronic aids, and you know, it's a wonderful tool, all the various apps that are on it. But have the board talk about just words of wisdom or whatnot on including the old school methods, paper charts and everything else.
Taught E6B stuff today.
I don't know. when we were young, the my wife was a special ed teacher, and she was talking about it. In general, the kids are now, rather than doing math on a piece of paper, 1+1, so on, so they can use a computer or a calculator. And I said, well, that doesn't help them. I said, when they become pilots, because they're all going to be pilots, they've got to be able to do the math in their heads, or at least write it down. And she said, that's not the way we're doing it these days. Rob was telling me as we were driving up here, Rob had his computer out and we're going through the ACS. And I said, can you find anything in the private pilot ACS that mandates that they have to use the plotter and the E6B? And we couldn't find anything, right? So they can use the electronic methods, but the scenario is based on, okay, the weather's getting bad and now you have to go somewhere else. How are you going to do that? And it also talks about checking the weather. So you need to teach how to check the weather. Is it good or bad? The assumption is, from what I see, the assumption is that everybody has an iPad with ForeFlight where they have a GPS. And I'm not so sure that's a good thing, because if those things fail, which they do, what are you going to do next? How are your students going to make it to the best place without having some basics of dead reckoning and pilotage?
Yeah, go ahead, Randall.
The new ACS very specifically says that flight logs generated online or on an app are acceptable. It also has use of electronic flight bag as one of the skill items for a number of the tasks. That's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it means you're not going to be required to do it old school. On the other hand, it means you need to understand the technology that you're bringing to the check ride, and you need to know A, how to use it, and B, how to deal with it if it fails. You still need to know the hard skills that the electronic flight bag is doing for you. So please be prepared to do those things on tests.
Yeah, with ForeFlight, I think I got into aviation at the perfect time. ForeFlight didn't exist. There were still NDBs and VORs, and I had to hand draw all my cross countries and use cross radials and time to identify waypoints, plus visually looking outside and comparing it to the chart. And then I got to watch ForeFlight be developed from really a hunk of garbage into the powerhouse that it is of situational awareness and information today. But that doesn't alleviate the necessity for us to look outside and look at our electronic flight bag and make sure that what it's telling us matches what's outside in the real world. I'm not 100% sure how GPS spoofing works, but if that makes your little blue airplane go away, you better be able to identify highways, power lines, railway intersections, towns, what those things look like that are still presented on the chart. And a very interesting thing that occasionally happens is someone shows up with ForeFlight and they have a different map option toggled than the sectional. Like, okay, tell me about that. Well, this actually is the aerial map and it shows what's actually outside. I'm like, all right, well, maybe with the aeronautical layer on, fine. But as long as you're also looking outside and comparing that, great. It's very surprising when, and this happens way too often, candidate shows up, ForeFlight on the iPad, go for the cross country, ForeFlight goes on the lap, Navlog goes over top of ForeFlight, and it's never looked at again. Like, well, how? Prove to me where you are. Well, that lake right there. Okay, well, is that the lake you want, or is that the lake you want, or is that the pond, or is that it, or is that it? Like, prove to me, show me that this is where you actually want to be. And ForeFlight kind of makes my job easy as an examiner because I do have the little blue airplane and I have your route on mine. And so now I can very clearly measure and see how you're doing in the navigation aspect and whether you're keeping track. And as a kind of great other side of the tool, the nav log on the map page is live updating your ETA to your checkpoints. So as long as you understand where it's getting that information from and how it's recalculating, the requirement for us to be plus or minus 5 minutes is to the second, because now that's updating. It's still up to you to keep track and make sure, hey, yeah, I'm flying my planned power settings, true airspeed, the wind correction angles are there. I'm flying it how I planned it. Or, hey, what I planned is wrong because it was 5 hours ago and a low pressure moved through. So I'm flying this new calculated number and it's making sense. You still have to prove that you're flying to that standard. But it's a great tool as long as you use it correctly. And anything you bring to the check ride, you are required to demonstrate proficiency with. If all you know is direct enter, that may not quite meet that standard. So as a CFIs, teach them at least how to build a flight plan in their GPS on the panel if they have it. So I want to, there's great training resources online as well. There's great free videos. ForeFlight has training videos and there's a ton of power in here and you don't necessarily have to extract all of it, but I want to encourage you to use it. I've flown coast to coast with just this multiple times. And to tell one more story, I don't intentionally fail a device. But there was a couple summers ago where I was doing a private pilot check ride, starting off with the landings, and we were in a Piper in July, and we landed, taxied off, and I opened the door to let some cool air in. Candidate said, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I was just trying to cool it off in here. They're sweating more than I am." I said, "Close the door." "No problem." Close the door, lock it up, and we taxi. I say, "Hey, can I open the door to let some cool air in?" He goes, "No." Okay, no problem. Next takeoff will be a soft field takeoff. We'll go around the pattern. We'll do a soft field landing. Come back, land, taxi and back, get off the runway, and it's now hotter than last time in the aircraft. And I ask, "Hey, do you mind if I open the door, let some cool air in?" "No." Okay, no problem. Next takeoff's going to be the normal takeoff. Take me on the cross country route. Follow your plan. We get up to 2,500 feet and the iPad goes, I'm too hot, shutting down. That was the end of their navigation. They had nothing else set up. We ended up about 7 miles off course, and the distraction of trying to cool the thing down, we were not holding the altitudes. It just went downhill fast. And it wasn't a failure that I caused. It was just a natural, hey, that device exceeded its limitations. So if you don't have a backup or you don't have another tool, that was the real world aspect of it. And I had one shut down in Palm Springs. I had an iPad shut down in Palm Springs on me trying to get through the valley out there and not hit a mountain. But it was VFR. I just don't hit the mountain. But the airspace in LA was tricky. Anyway, that's the real world story there. Oh, I was trying, but I only had a little storm window, and it was a bubble canopy in an aerobatic airplane that I had this much room to move in. So that it was very tough to cool that thing down.
With the time we have, I think I'll take one or two more questions. Yeah. You don't have to say your name again.
So, not really a DPE question, but more of,
Yes, you do. Please do say your name again.
oh, okay. You'll be knowing mine. I got to do my CFI check ride with you. So,
Oh, great.
yeah, Tyler, but,
Oh, good.
yeah. So this is more of a question of experience and time in the industry. Mark said earlier, and what Rob followed up on is that if you don't think you can be a good CFI, don't be a CFI, which is very plain and simple when put in. We are in a culture now where it seems that the aviation field is rapidly expanding in multiple facets due to factors like globalization since the 90s and people wanting to travel more and be out more, and the alternative methods in order to allow someone who is a fledgling commercial pilot to get there are shrinking rapidly. And some of these, such as like survey flying, for example, is being replaced by drones. Actually, that's drones are replacing an awful lot of what's been going on: aerial photography, lights, scenic things, filming, etc. And we also have a system in place with some of the major schools around the United States, at least, that not only encourage the idea of getting your CFI after your commercial, but bake it into their syllabi and their lesson plans of, hey, you're going to come here, but you have to work for us for 4 years afterwards instead of being able to do this. And I know it's like, oh, do your research beforehand, but I know a lot of other individuals who have felt trapped by this idea because maybe you get into it and you're a kid who's probably in their 20s or something like that. You think, I want to do this. I want to fly on the airlines. The ad on TV said they bring in 150K a week, and I think I have the talent to do it. And you get there and you go, okay, I recognize that I don't have, let's say, the bedside manner to be a CFI. Maybe I can do my job as a pilot, but when it comes to instructing, it's not going to make it. What advice do you have for someone in this industry now where their options are so limited, and they don't know essentially what they can do?
Tyler, that's a fantastic question. I think being honest with yourself and being honest about what you're able to do is really the way to start. Zappos shoes used to pay people to quit. If they would quit after training, they'd get $1,000 because they figured if the $1,000 was worth it to you, they wanted you to leave. We have airlines now that have mandatory captain upgrade. As soon as you have enough time, they're offering you or making you take that left seat. We're also having large training bonuses, or sorry, training repayment plans for leaving airlines early. The system is really getting in the way of building quality aviators who really want to be there, much like a military draft versus, say, voluntary conscription. Being honest with yourself about what it is you're able to do and being honest with the people you're around and honest about the opportunities that you take, that will do you, that'll do great things for you in aviation.
the CFI route for a lot of folks is one of the only ones that they really can take because you're paid to fly. I came from Ohio. I made $12,500 a year as a CFI, and I was flying about 900 hours a year. I ate a lot of peanut butter sandwiches because jelly was too expensive, and I definitely could not afford to buy my own plane, even a cheap one. But there's nothing more expensive than a cheap airplane, so be careful there. The survey side, I don't think it's going to completely disappear. You're right, drones are doing a lot, but they can't do the large swaths, and people are getting into that job and leaving as soon as they have their hours, and those companies really aren't disappearing either. So I think those opportunities are still going to exist for at least 10 to 20 more years, as well as pipeline patrol. That's probably going to go a little more to the drones as well, just due to the shortish runs that those can have. But we still don't have battery life that can really do that job. I used to fly pipeline as well. So unfortunately, it may be the smallest evil, the least evil? I don't know, the lesser of two evils, that you be a CFI. So if you've made that decision, then just commit to it. You don't half like your girlfriends, right? Okay, love the one you're with. I think those are song lyrics from the 70s. Do that job with everything that you can, because what you are passing on is also how that person is going to act as a CFI, especially when they're rather new as a student pilot. They're going to remember you forever. So that's a big responsibility in itself too. So be that example. And unfortunately, besides going to maybe another country, not the U.S., that has lower hiring minimums, which is potentially an option, you would be gaining experience over there. You may not like it. It may not be the best environment. It may not be the best safety culture, but you're certainly going to learn things that you're going to carry with you the rest of your career too. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit, gentlemen.
Take one more.
One more.
Okay.
Thank you for your time this evening. As a kind of an independent CFI, not within a structured 141 environment, some Part 61s like to act as 141s, like East Coast Aero Club, like CHI, where you do basically go through stages of training where that pre-solo stage is great. You're flying with the same instructor, and then you do a stage check with somebody else. As an instructor at a school that doesn't have that luxury, and having another instructor kind of check your work and make sure that you're teaching the right thing, what advice would you give somebody like myself where I don't have the ability to hand it off to another instructor and just be like, okay, good. He doesn't do a carrier landing every time. I just want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing.
One of the issues that I feel we have is the tutelage and the oversight of the new instructors. You come out of all this, you happen to do well on your CFI test, and you're set free, and you can do it independently. Who's watching us? No one really. In some cases, I watch the instructors at East Coast Aero Club, but I'm only one guy, so I can only cycle through everybody and observe them. But it is difficult, and it's something that I feel should be done. But then I'm just a taxpayer.
There's
Just
something
one
that
last
Mark's,
comment on that. I think any CFI or any instructor in any area will get better every time you do it. I think it's an issue of here's a lesson I just concluded. What did I learn from that? Meaning, if I had done this differently, the student would have got caught on quicker. So I'm just saying there's no substitute for experience. Just keep doing it, and every time you do it, be very conscious, very focused on the fact, what could I have done differently?
There's
I guess
something that
I-
Mark's,
oh, I'm sorry, Randall.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
As I said before, you have experience out there. It's okay to call and say, I'm confused, or can you help me? Can you give me a better way?
I the tactic that I used for this is to encourage your students and yourself to be a 4-year-old. What does a 4-year-old do? They ask why all the time. And there's always an answer and there's always another why. And the answer should never be because I said so. It should be because, well, we know that this, and this are true, and that affects this, and this. And you should be able to work your way through the gauntlet of whys and potentially even find, and I don't know. And what do we as CFIs do when we run into an I don't know? We tack on, but let me find out. Let me look it up. Let's look it up together. And so now you're not only imparting the knowledge that you have, but you're also now teaching this student how to find the information for themselves as they go about their flying career and their own whys. And if they ever run into an I don't know, they now know how to find it. So, lack of an oversight, just look for truth. Just look for truth.
That's a really beautiful point. I like that a lot. Mark's boss once said to me, we're not going to give that student a grant to come to you. You're an independent flight instructor. I was mad at him because I worked hard to surround myself with good, high time flight instructors who had way more time than I had, who could advise me, people who I could reach out to for questions just like what you mentioned. And Tyler, going back to your question, maybe you are going to turn into a CFI because that's the only track that's available to you to get where it is you want to go. But that's part of the professionalism of the job, is to lean in, like Rob said, lean into those questions, lean into finding the answers, lean into learning how to teach, even if it doesn't come naturally to you. And if this is the stage in your career development, then there you are. That's what you're doing, even though you don't love it. But please be honest with yourself as you're doing it. And please, as instructors, especially independent instructors, build that family, that cadre of other smarter instructors around you. Mark answers his phone. I answer my phone. You are welcome to call us and say, hey, I'm nervous about this student going out on a test. And I'll just, I'll tell one very brief story. I had an instructor who was working for our flight club, and he called me and he said, I don't know what to do. This guy is ready for solo, but the plane's been acting up in the pattern. I'm not sure what's going on, but it just doesn't feel quite right. I said, well, you're with him now. You're going to make the decision. You can either tell him that this doesn't feel quite right to you. I'm sorry, even though you're ready for solo, you're not going to solo today. Or you can call his parents and tell them why he didn't come home last night when the plane crashed. He ultimately told the student, sorry, you can't solo today. The student went to a different school, had his first solo in a different airplane. And 2 days later, when they drove the plane over to maintenance, the bottom of the carburetor fell off. It was something that had happened years before that nobody had caught. The bolts had been over torqued. So using that professional discretion to make those hard decisions is affecting the bottom line, and it is helping people keep safe. So surround yourself by mentor pilots who can help you, and please call us.
I was in a degree program that required, in order to graduate, I had to have a CFI. And I did not want it. It was the course I looked forward to the least. Everybody got commercial single engine, went right into CFI, and then did their multi after they had the CFI. I went down to multi-commercial because I didn't want to do CFI. Finally did the CFI training, graduated the course, and then had to wait 9 months for an examiner. In that 9 months, I was working as a commercial pilot and line crewman at my hometown airport, pumping gas. If somebody came in and said, hey, I'd like an airplane ride, they wouldn't tap a CFI and take them away from a student. They'd say, hey, Rob, go grab the 172 and go take them for a ride. Well, 172, you can fly from either seat, so I'd fly from the right seat. I'd take off, do all the checklists and everything, get it up to altitude, and they're like, hey, want to fly for a second? Up, down, left, right. Oh, okay. And they'd fly for 5-10 minutes, whatever. We'd come back in, I'd land it. And every time we got out of the airplane, it was the same. that was so awesome. I love that. That was so cool. I can't believe I got to do that. And I was like, you know what? That was awesome. And I love doing this. And I can't believe that I just shared this thing that I love with someone else and they loved it too. And that was the moment that turned it around. And it actually changed how I take check rides. Because every check ride leading up to that, I was doing what you're doing on the table right now. I was leaning forward and I was folding my hands and I was nervous and just trying to give the answers. My CFI check ride, I was leaning back in the chair against the wall. I was like, what do you want to talk about? You want to talk about engines? Let's talk about engines. It became a completely different experience for me. I was sharing. I wasn't teaching, I was sharing. And that's what turned it around. So I'm not saying that that's going to work for
Spreading.
you. It was an experience that I had.
You were spreading aviation.
If I may, and then we'll close. I knew I wanted to be in education. I was on the flip side. I always knew I wanted to be in education. What was always so profound to me was the more I acted as an instructor and realized that I was helping people create their own decision-making process, which, sorry, and today, kids coming out of high school don't get taught how to make decisions. You're reforming someone's decision-making process. That just felt so important. The more I did it, the more I liked it. Lots of younger time CFIs that graduate from SNU, North Shore, Bridgewater, we all keep in touch. What's always really funny to me, especially now, is all the cool stuff you can teach out of. All the cool stuff you can teach out of. I mean, I'm going to call him Mark again. I think it was 2015. Mark was like, hey, why don't you teach how to super decathlon? And I was like, really? And it just keeps your education going. It keeps making you a better pilot, more skilled instructor. We had one graduate go teach in the GROB out of Dothan, Alabama. I was like, the grub, it's amazing. It's what I want to do before I came to SNU. Aerobatic, turboprop, pressurized trainer, 500-hour CFI. A little jealous. That being said, before I break everything, I know we're super over time. Thank you, everybody, for hanging on. Thank you, Randall, for staying with us. I'm not sure where you are in the world right now. That email signature is very appropriate. It's randall@whereisrandall.com. Very nice. Thank you so much to our panel tonight. This concludes this spring's New England CFI DPE seminar. Again, if you're looking for wings credit for attending tonight's event, we do have the sign-up sheet in the back. I basically live here. I'll be hanging around here for the rest of the night. If you want to talk about aviation, academia, or what have you, please stay around, hang out, let's have a conversation. Again, thank you everybody for coming out and participating. Hope you enjoyed tonight.